The abandoned orange cat was left to die, until a stranger whispered its name. Elm Street, once a proud artery of Oak Haven, Ohio, now resembled a forgotten vein. The grand Victorian houses, with their peeling paint and sagging porches, stood as silent witnesses to a bygone era of prosperity. Empty storefronts gaped like missing teeth, their windows plastered with faded, for-lease signs that had long since surrendered to the relentless march of economic decline. Oak Haven was a town slowly fading, a place where dreams went to wither, and hope was a luxury few could afford. The air hung heavy with a damp chill, the scent of decaying leaves mingling with the faint, acrid odor of the abandoned steel mill that loomed on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of town where the sun seemed to struggle to break through the perpetual gray, a place where even the stray dogs seemed to carry an air of weary resignation. Among the shadows and the forgotten corners of Elm Street, a skinny orange cat eked out a precarious existence. He was a patchwork of matted fur and protruding ribs, his once vibrant coat dulled by dust and neglect. One ear was torn, a testament to a long-forgotten battle, and his amber eyes, though still sharp, held a haunting flicker of fear. He moved with a cautious, almost apologetic gait, as if apologizing for his very presence in a world that had long since ceased to care. His days were a monotonous cycle of survival. He scavenged for scraps behind the Greasy Spoon Diner, its neon sign flickering intermittently like a dying heartbeat. He darted into the overgrown alleyways, dodging the rusty shopping carts and overflowing dumpsters, always alert for the menacing growl of a stray dog or the sudden swerve of a car. He knew the dangers of Elm Street intimately, the cruel taunts of bored teenagers, the hiss of a cornered rat, the gnawing emptiness in his belly that was a constant companion. He wasn't always like this. There were fleeting, fragmented memories, a warm lap, a gentle hand stroking his fur, the comforting rumble of a human voice. But these memories were like wisps of smoke, fading as quickly as they appeared, leaving him with an ache of longing he couldn't quite comprehend. The townspeople, those who remained, barely registered his presence. He was just another stray, another casualty of Oak Haven's decline. They might occasionally toss him a crust of bread or a leftover bone, but their eyes held no warmth, no connection. He was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their fading world. He found meager shelter in the abandoned buildings, under the crumbling porches, or in the hollowed-out trunk of a fallen oak tree at the edge of the deserted park. He learned to distinguish the sound of approaching footsteps, differentiating between the heavy tread of a potential threat and the shuffling gait of an elderly woman who sometimes left out a saucer of milk, though he was always too wary to approach while she was near. The nights were the hardest. The cold seeped into his bones, and the shadows seemed to come alive with imagined dangers. He would curl himself into the tightest ball he could manage, trying to conserve what little warmth he had, his ears twitching at every creak and rustle. Sleep was a fitful, restless affair, punctuated by hunger pangs and the haunting echoes of a life he could no longer remember. As the days grew shorter and the nights grew colder, a sense of despair began to creep into his weary heart. He was losing weight, his movements becoming slower, his spirit flickering like a dying ember. He knew, with the cold certainty of an animal facing its end, that he wouldn't survive another winter on the streets of Oak Haven. One evening, as the sky bled into a bruised purple, the first fat raindrops began to fall. The wind picked up, whipping through the empty streets, scattering leaves and debris. A storm was brewing, a violent outburst of nature that mirrored the turmoil in the cat's own fragile existence. He searched frantically for shelter, his usual hiding places offering little protection from the gathering tempest. He knew, with a primal instinct, that this storm was different. It was a harbinger of something, a turning point. He just didn't know whether it would be his salvation or his final undoing. The rain intensified, plastering his fur to his bony frame, and the wind howled like a banshee, drowning out the last vestiges of hope in the wasteland of Elm Street. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a town that had forgotten how to care. The storm raged with a ferocity that seemed to mock the dilapidated town. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning Elm Street into a churning river. The wind tore at the loose shingles of the old houses, creating a cacophony of rattling and creaking that echoed through the empty streets. Rusty, soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably, pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the abandoned hardware store, seeking a sliver of protection from the onslaught. He had tried to find shelter under the porch of the diner, but the owner, a burly man with a perpetually sour expression, had chased him away with a broom and a string of curses. He had darted across the street, narrowly avoiding being hit by a pickup truck that swerved wildly, its headlights momentarily illuminating his terrified form before disappearing into the swirling rain. He was at his lowest point. His injured leg, a remnant of a recent encounter with a territorial dog, throbbed with a dull ache. His empty stomach cramped with hunger, and his body trembled with a weakness that went beyond mere physical exhaustion. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. He was ready to give up. Across the street, in a small, well-kept Victorian house that stood in stark contrast to its neglected neighbors, Martha Peterson watched the storm with a growing sense of unease. The wind rattled the windows, and the rain beat against the glass like insistent fingers. She was used to the solitude of her life, had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of her days since her husband, George, had passed away 5 years ago. But tonight, the storm stirred something within her, a sense of loneliness that she usually kept carefully buried. Martha was a woman of 72, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and experience. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, though faded with age, still held a spark of kindness and resilience. She had lived in Oak Haven her entire life, had witnessed its slow decline with a heavy heart. As she peered through the rain-streaked window, she noticed a small, huddled shape under a bush across the street. At first, she thought it was a pile of leaves, but then she saw a slight movement, a flicker of orange fur. It was a cat, a miserably drenched and utterly forlorn creature. Martha hesitated. She had always loved animals, had shared her life with a succession of beloved pets over the years. But her last cat, a ginger tabby named Marmalade, had died 2 years ago, and the loss had hit her hard. She had vowed never to get another pet, fearing the inevitable heartbreak. Besides, strays could be unpredictable, carrying diseases or fleas. But the sight of the cat, so obviously suffering, tugged at her heartstrings. She remembered George, his gentle hands always ready to help any creature in need. He would have never hesitated. With a sigh, Martha made up her mind. She went to the kitchen and found a can of tuna, opening it and placing a small amount on a saucer. She then put on her raincoat and boots, grabbed an old umbrella, and cautiously stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly ripped the umbrella from her grasp, and the rain stung her face. She made her way across the street, her steps slow and deliberate. As she approached the bush, the cat tensed, its body pressed even flatter against the ground. Martha stopped a few feet away, not wanting to frighten him further. She spoke softly, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "Here, kitty, kitty," she said, her tone gentle and reassuring. "I've got some food for you. It's all right, I won't hurt you." Rusty, his senses heightened by fear and desperation, heard the voice. It was a kind voice, a voice unlike any he had heard in a long time. He lifted his head slightly, his amber eyes peering out from under the dripping leaves. Martha slowly placed the saucer of tuna on the ground and stepped back. She held the umbrella over the food, trying to shield it from the rain. "There you go," she whispered. "It's good tuna. Come on, eat up." Rusty didn't move. He was paralyzed by a mixture of fear and longing. The smell of the tuna was intoxicating, but his instincts screamed at him to flee. He had learned the hard way that humans were not to be trusted. Martha waited patiently, her heart aching for the poor creature. She remembered a time, many years ago, when she and George had found a lost kitten during a similar storm. They had named him Leo because of his brave heart, despite being so small. He had been a part of their family for 15 glorious years. Lost in her memories, Martha spoke without thinking, a whisper carried away by the wind. "Leo?" she murmured, the name escaping her lips like a prayer. The effect on Rusty was instantaneous. He froze, his body going rigid. The name, it was familiar, a distant echo from a forgotten past. It resonated deep within him, stirring a flicker of recognition that sent a shiver down his spine. He took a tentative step forward, his gaze fixed on Martha. The rain continued to fall, but for a moment, the storm seemed to fade into the background. The only thing that mattered was the woman, the food, and the name that had somehow awakened something within him. He was still scared, still wary, but a tiny spark of hope, fragile and tentative, had been ignited in the darkness of his despair. He took another step, and then another, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't comprehend. He was starving, and the whisper had changed everything. The following days were a delicate dance between fear and trust. Martha continued to leave food out for the orange cat, placing it a little closer to her porch each day. She spoke to him in soft, soothing tones, calling him Leo, the name that had sparked that initial, inexplicable reaction. She didn't know why she'd chosen that name, other than it reminded her of her beloved, long-lost cat, but it seemed to resonate with the stray. Rusty, for that was who he was, though Martha didn't know it yet, remained cautious. He would wait until Martha had gone back inside before creeping out from his hiding place to eat. He would devour the food quickly, his body tense and alert, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. He watched Martha through the window, his amber eyes studying her every move, trying to decipher her intentions. Martha, in turn, observed him with growing compassion. She noticed the limp, the matted fur, the scars that told a silent story of hardship. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw something else, a flicker of intelligence, a hint of a gentle soul trapped within a battered body. She began to research online, reading articles about how to gain the trust of a feral cat. She learned about the importance of patience, consistency, and non-threatening body language. She started spending time sitting on her porch, reading a book or knitting, simply being present without making any direct approach. She would talk to him, telling him about her day, about George, about the garden she used to tend with such loving care. Slowly, gradually, Rusty began to relax his guard. He started to associate Martha with food and safety. He would still flinch if she moved too quickly, but he no longer ran away at the sight of her. He began to linger longer after eating, watching her from a distance, his tail twitching occasionally. One afternoon, as Martha was sitting on the porch, humming softly to herself, Rusty surprised her. He had finished his meal and, instead of retreating to his usual hiding place, he sat down a few feet away, his gaze fixed on her. He let out a soft, almost inaudible meow. Martha's heart skipped a beat. She kept her voice calm and even. "Hello, Leo," she said softly. "Are you talking to me?" Rusty meowed again, a little louder this time. He took a tentative step closer. Martha held her breath, resisting the urge to reach out and touch him. She remained still, letting him make the first move. He took another step and then another. He was close enough now that she could see the individual whiskers on his face, the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. He hesitated for a moment, his body tense. Then he lowered his head and gently bumped it against her outstretched hand. It was a brief, fleeting contact, but it sent a jolt of emotion through Martha. A tear rolled down her cheek. It was the first time he had willingly touched her. It was a breakthrough. From that moment on, things began to change more rapidly. Rusty allowed Martha to pet him, tentatively at first, then with increasing enjoyment. He would purr, a low rumble that vibrated through his thin body. He started to follow her around the porch, rubbing against her legs, his tail held high. Martha discovered that he loved to be brushed. She bought a soft brush and spent hours gently grooming his matted fur, removing the tangles and dirt. He would close his eyes in blissful contentment, leaning into the brush, his purr growing louder with each stroke. As Rusty's physical condition improved, so did his personality. He began to show signs of playfulness, batting at dangling strings, chasing imaginary mice. He would greet Martha at the door with a cheerful meow, his tail waving like a banner. He was still wary of strangers, and loud noises would send him scurrying for cover. But with Martha, he was slowly becoming a different cat. Martha's life, too, was transformed. The emptiness that had settled in her heart after George's death began to recede. She had a purpose again, a reason to get up in the morning. She found herself smiling more, laughing at Rusty's antics, feeling a warmth and companionship she hadn't experienced in years. Leo had brought a spark of joy back into her quiet life. She also started noticing details which brought back memories. One day she commented, "You have the same white spot on your chest as my old Leo," and a picture of the younger her and George flashed in her mind. She quickly refocused, enjoying her new friend. She looked forward to their time together each day. One evening, as Martha was sitting on the porch with Rusty curled up on her lap, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, George. I think you sent him to me." She felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling that she was no longer alone. The glimmer of trust that had sparked in the rain had blossomed into a bond of love and companionship, a testament to the enduring power of kindness and the resilience of the feline spirit. With each passing day, Rusty, now comfortably referred to as Leo by Martha, shed more of his feral shell. He still retained a degree of caution, a skittishness around sudden movements or loud noises, but his transformation was remarkable. His once dull coat now gleamed with a healthy sheen. His ribs were no longer visible, and his amber eyes, once filled with fear, now sparkled with curiosity and affection. He had become, in essence, a house cat, relishing the comforts of a warm bed, Martha's spare armchair, which he had claimed as his own, regular meals, and the constant, gentle presence of his human companion. Martha doted on him. She bought him toys, feather wands, crinkle balls, and a catnip-filled mouse that he would carry around like a prized trophy. She talked to him constantly, sharing her thoughts and memories, treating him as a confidant and friend. She had even started tending to her neglected garden again, inspired by Rusty's playful explorations of the overgrown flower beds. But beneath the surface of this newfound happiness, fragments of Rusty's past began to surface. These weren't conscious memories, not at first, but rather sensory triggers that evoked fleeting, visceral reactions. The smell of freshly baked bread, for instance, would cause him to pause, his head cocked, a faraway look in his eyes. The sound of children's laughter from the nearby park would make him prick up his ears and stare intently, his tail twitching nervously. One evening, while Martha was watching an old movie on television, a classic family film with a scene involving a moving van, Rusty, who had been dozing peacefully on the sofa, suddenly leaped up, his fur on end, and let out a series of distressed meows. He paced back and forth, agitated and restless, his eyes wide with a fear Martha hadn't seen in weeks. She quickly muted the television and knelt beside him, stroking his fur and speaking in soothing tones. "What is it, Leo? What's wrong, sweetheart?" He couldn't answer, of course, but the scene had triggered a deep-seated trauma, a buried memory of the day he had lost everything. Slowly, over time, these fragmented memories began to coalesce, forming a clearer picture of his past. He was Leo, but not Martha's Leo. He had belonged to a family, a loving family with 2 young children, a boy and a girl. He remembered the warmth of their hugs, the playful tugs on his tail, the shared laughter and bedtime stories. He remembered a large white house with a sprawling backyard, a swing set, and a sandbox. He remembered the scent of his mother's perfume, the father's strong, reassuring hands, and the children's endless games of fetch and hide and seek. He remembered the day the moving van arrived, the chaos and confusion, the boxes piled high, the unfamiliar faces. He remembered being scared, hiding under a bush, watching as the van drove away, taking his family, his home, his entire world with it. He remembered running after the van, his small legs pumping furiously, his desperate meows lost in the roar of the engine. He remembered the crushing realization that he had been left behind. These memories, now surfacing with increasing clarity, were bittersweet. They were filled with a profound sense of loss and longing, but they also reminded him of who he was, of the love he had once known. He started to exhibit behaviors that Martha found puzzling. He would paw at the door, as if wanting to go outside, but then retreat in fear. He would meow at the window, watching the passing cars with a strange intensity. Martha, oblivious to his true past, attributed these behaviors to his lingering instincts as a former stray. She tried to reassure him, to make him feel safe and secure, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was troubling him, something she couldn't quite understand. The idyllic peace of their life together was further disrupted by the introduction of a new element of conflict. Mr. Henderson, a grumpy, reclusive man who lived next door, had always been a source of minor annoyance to Martha. He complained about everything, the leaves from her trees that fell on his lawn, the noise of her wind chimes, the occasional stray bird that dared to land on his bird feeder. Now, his attention was focused on Rusty. Mr. Henderson hated cats. He considered them pests, carriers of disease, and a general nuisance. He had seen Rusty in Martha's yard and had made his displeasure known, grumbling about that mangy stray and threatening to call animal control. Martha had tried to reason with him, explaining that Leo was no longer a stray, that he was her pet, and that he was well cared for. But Mr. Henderson was unmoved. He was a man set in his ways, a man who found satisfaction in complaining, and Rusty had become his latest target. One afternoon, Martha found a note taped to her door. It was from Mr. Henderson, a crudely written message that read, "Get rid of that cat or I'm calling the authorities. You have been warned." Martha's heart sank. She knew that Mr. Henderson was capable of carrying out his threat. She was worried about what might happen to Rusty if animal control got involved. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, not after all they had been through. She decided she needed to take precautions. She made an appointment with the local veterinarian, Dr. Emily Carter, a kind and compassionate woman who had treated Martha's previous pets. She explained the situation to Dr. Carter, emphasizing that Rusty, while technically a stray she'd taken in, was now her beloved companion. Dr. Carter examined Rusty thoroughly, giving him a clean bill of health. She also updated his vaccinations and, at Martha's request, inserted a microchip under his skin. Martha knew it was a long shot, that he was likely just a local stray, but she wanted to do everything she could to protect him. "Just in case," she told Dr. Carter, her voice trembling slightly. "Just in case he ever gets lost again." Little did she know how prescient those words would prove to be. The shadow of the past was looming, and the threat from Mr. Henderson was about to trigger a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The following week was filled with a tense undercurrent of anxiety. Martha tried to keep Rusty indoors as much as possible, but he had grown accustomed to his supervised excursions in the garden, and he would whine and scratch at the door, restless and frustrated. Martha felt a growing sense of dread, anticipating Mr. Henderson's next move. She was right to be worried. One sunny afternoon, as Rusty was basking in a patch of sunlight on the porch, a white van with the logo of Oakhaven Animal Control pulled up in front of Martha's house. A uniformed officer, a young man with a stern expression, stepped out and approached the house. Martha's heart leaped into her throat. She knew exactly why he was there. She quickly scooped Rusty into her arms, holding him close, her hand trembling as she stroked his fur. The doorbell rang, a jarring sound that echoed through the quiet house. Martha took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, and went to answer the door. "Mrs. Peterson?" the officer asked, his tone official. "Yes," Martha replied, her voice barely a whisper. "We received a complaint about a stray cat on your property," he said. "A Mr. Henderson reported it. Are you harboring a stray animal?" Martha stood tall, her eyes meeting the officer's gaze. "He's not a stray," she said firmly. "He's my cat. His name is Leo." Do you have any proof of ownership? The officer asked. Vaccination records? A license? Martha felt a surge of panic. She had the vaccination records, but no license. She hadn't thought it necessary. I have his vaccination records, she said. And he's microchipped. The officer's expression softened slightly. A microchip, he said. That's good. We can scan him and see if he's registered. Rusty, sensing the tension, began to struggle in Martha's arms. He let out a frightened meow, his claws extending. Please, Martha said, her voice pleading. He's scared. He's not used to strangers. The officer nodded. I understand, he said, but we have to follow procedure. If he's not registered, we'll have to take him to the shelter. Martha's world seemed to crumble around her. The thought of Rusty being taken to the shelter, caged and alone, was unbearable. She held him tighter, burying her face in his fur, tears welling up in her eyes. The officer retrieved a small, handheld scanner from his van. He approached Rusty cautiously, speaking in a soothing tone. Easy, kitty, he said. This won't hurt. Rusty hissed and spat, his body tense with fear. Martha held him firmly, whispering reassurances in his ear. The officer managed to scan the microchip, the device emitting a soft beep. The officer looked at the reading on the scanner, his eyebrows raising slightly. He looked at Martha, then back at the scanner. Ma'am, he said, this cat is registered, but the information, it's not your address. Martha's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. The name on the microchip is Leo, the officer said, but the registered owner is a family named Anderson. The address is outdated, but it's from a town about 100 miles from here. Martha felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Leo Anderson, it couldn't be. Could it? Can you tell me the family's names? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The officer consulted the scanner again. The parents are listed as Robert and Susan Anderson, he said. There are 2 children, a boy named Ethan and a girl named Chloe. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Those were the names Rusty had reacted to, the names that had stirred those fragmented memories. He was Leo, the lost cat, the beloved pet who had disappeared years ago. The officer, seeing Martha's distress, spoke gently. Ma'am, I understand this is a shock, he said, but it seems this cat has a family who's been missing him. Martha couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of joy and heartbreak. She had found him, cared for him, loved him, and now she had to give him back. The officer explained that he would need to contact the Andersons, using the outdated information on the microchip, and try to track them down. He assured Martha that he would keep her informed and that, in the meantime, Rusty could stay with her. Martha, still reeling from the revelation, could only nod numbly. She held Rusty close, burying her face in his fur, her mind racing. She had to find his family. She had to do what was right, even though it would break her heart. The animal control officer left. Martha took Rusty and sat in her armchair. She pet him gently, trying to come to terms with what she had to do. She knew what it felt like to lose a pet. This family had been without Rusty for years. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and internet searches. Martha, with the help of her neighbor's granddaughter, Sarah, a tech-savvy teenager, managed to find a social media profile for a Susan Anderson that looked promising. The profile picture showed a woman who could be the right age, and there were pictures of 2 children, now teenagers, who resembled the names on the microchip. Martha, with Sarah's help, sent a message to Susan Anderson, explaining the situation and attaching a picture of Rusty. It was a long shot, but it was all she could do. The wait was agonizing. Martha paced the floor, checking her phone every few minutes, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Rusty, sensing her anxiety, stayed close by her side, rubbing against her legs and purring softly. Finally, late that evening, a reply came. It was from Susan Anderson. Her message was short, filled with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. "Oh my God! Is that really him? Is that really our Leo?" The subsequent hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Martha and Susan exchanged a flurry of messages, sharing pictures and stories, confirming beyond any doubt that Rusty was indeed the long-lost Leo. Susan explained that they had moved from their old house, the one listed on the microchip, several years after Leo had disappeared. They had searched for him desperately, putting up posters, contacting shelters, but had eventually, heartbroken, given up hope. They had never forgotten him, though, and had often wondered what had become of their beloved cat. Martha learned that Ethan and Chloe, now 16 and 18, were ecstatic at the news. They had grown up with Leo, and his disappearance had left a void in their lives. They couldn't believe he was alive and well, after all these years. A video call was arranged. Martha held her phone up so that Susan and her children could see Rusty. The moment they saw him, tears welled up in their eyes. "Leo!" Chloe cried, her voice choked with emotion. "Oh, Leo, it's really you." Ethan, his voice trembling, said, He looks just like we remember him, only older." Rusty, hearing their voices, perked up his ears. He stared at the phone, his head cocked, a flicker of recognition in his amber eyes. He let out a soft meow, a sound that sent shivers down Martha's spine. Susan, wiping away tears, said, "Martha, we can't thank you enough. You saved him. You gave him a home when he had none. We are eternally grateful." Martha, her own eyes filled with tears, replied, "He saved me too. He brought joy back into my life. I love him very much." The arrangements were made for the Andersons to come to Oak Haven the following day. Martha spent the night restless, her emotions a tangled mess of happiness for Rusty and sadness for herself. She knew she was doing the right thing, but the thought of saying goodbye was almost unbearable. The next morning, Martha prepared a special breakfast for Rusty, a can of his favorite salmon-flavored food. She brushed his fur until it shone, wanting him to look his best for his family. She talked to him, explaining as best she could what was happening, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going home, Leo," she whispered, stroking his soft fur. "You're going back to your family. They love you very much, and they've missed you terribly." Rusty looked at her, his amber eyes filled with a depth of understanding that she couldn't quite fathom. He nuzzled her hand, purring softly, as if to reassure her. The doorbell rang, and Martha's heart leaped into her throat. It was time. She opened the door, and there they were: Robert, Susan, Ethan, and Chloe Anderson. They stood on her porch, their faces a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Martha stepped aside, inviting them in. "He's in the living room," she said, her voice trembling. The Andersons rushed into the living room, their eyes searching. Rusty, who had been sleeping on his favorite armchair, looked up, his ears twitching. "Leo," Susan said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Rusty stared at them for a moment, his body tense. Then slowly he rose to his feet. He took a tentative step forward, then another. He let out a soft meow, a sound that was both a question and a greeting. Chloe, unable to contain herself any longer, rushed forward and knelt beside him. She gently stroked his fur, tears streaming down her face. "Leo," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "Oh, Leo, we've missed you so much." Rusty leaned into her touch, his purr rumbling like a tiny engine. He rubbed his head against her hand, his tail waving slowly. He remembered. He knew he was home. Ethan and Robert joined them, kneeling beside Rusty, stroking him and murmuring words of love and reassurance. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated joy, a reunion that had been years in the making. Martha stood back, watching the scene unfold, her heart overflowing with a bittersweet mix of emotions. She was happy for Rusty, for his family, but a profound sense of loss ached within her. Susan looked up at Martha, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for taking care of him. Thank you for giving him back to us." Martha shook her head. "He gave me so much more," she said, her voice trembling. "He was a gift, a true gift." The Andersons stayed for several hours, spending time with Rusty, getting reacquainted, sharing stories. They learned about Martha's life, about her late husband, George, and about how Rusty had come to her during the storm. They understood the bond that had formed between them, the love that had blossomed in the quiet solitude of Oakhaven. Before they left, Robert, his voice filled with sincerity, said, "Martha, we know this is hard for you. We know you love him, but you'll always be a part of his life. Your family now. We want you to visit, to stay in touch. He has 2 homes now, 2 families who love him." Chloe added, "We'll send you pictures and videos. You can come and see him whenever you want." Martha, her heart overflowing with gratitude, could only nod, tears streaming down her face. She knew that she would never truly lose Rusty. He would always be a part of her, and she would always be a part of his story. The farewell was bittersweet. Martha hugged Rusty tightly, whispering goodbye in his ear, her heart aching with the pain of separation. But she knew he was going to a loving home, to a family who had never stopped searching for him. As the Andersons drove away, with Rusty safely nestled in a carrier on Chloe's lap, Martha stood on her porch, watching until they were out of sight. She felt a profound sense of emptiness, but also a deep sense of peace. She had done the right thing. She had reunited a lost cat with his family, and in doing so, she had found a connection that would last a lifetime. In the days and weeks that followed, Martha kept in touch with the Andersons. They sent her pictures and videos of Rusty, showing him settling into his new life, playing with his old toys, which they had miraculously kept, exploring his new surroundings. He looked happy, content, surrounded by love. Martha, though she missed him terribly, found solace in their updates. She began to tend to her garden again, finding a renewed sense of purpose in nurturing the flowers and plants that Rusty had loved to explore. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter, inspired by her experience with Rusty, wanting to help other lost and abandoned animals find their way home. One sunny afternoon, a few weeks after Rusty's departure, Martha received a surprise visit. It was the Andersons with Rusty in tow. They had come to spend the day with her, to share a meal, to let Rusty roam in the garden he had come to love. As Martha watched Rusty playing with Ethan and Chloe, chasing butterflies and basking in the sun, she felt a warmth spread through her heart. He was home, truly home, and she was a part of that home, a part of his extended family. The abandoned orange cat, once left to die, had found his way back to love, and in doing so, he had brought 2 families together, forging a bond that transcended time and distance. The wasteland of Elm Street had, in its own small way, become a place of hope and healing, a testament to the enduring power of connection and the unwavering loyalty of a cat named Rusty, who was, and always would be, Leo.